Hey, Texas history students, welcome back. And so we're going to pick up with Roman numeral 4. Today is our third day. This is lecture 3. So this should be watched on March 19th, this specific lecture. So we're going to start with Roman numeral 4, Buffalo Soldiers and Outlaws. This will complete the chapter once we finish Roman numeral 4, and I will give you specific instructions as to what we are going to do later on. So keep checking your emails and the stream page for important updates. All right, so let's look at Roman numeral 4, Buffalo Soldiers and Outlaws. There were African American troops that were sent to the frontier after the Civil War, and during the Civil War, these African American troops had escaped from slavery in the South, fled to the North, joined the Union Army in order to fight and help free the slaves in the South. Now, just because the Union did not support slavery does not mean that they were perfect. There were racist Northerners at the time. And even though they didn't support slavery, they also did not believe that African Americans should fight alongside white soldiers, sadly. And so they segregated troops. And the term segregate or segregated means separated based on race or ethnicity. And so these 180,000 African Americans, they fought in segregated units for the Union Army. But now that the Civil War was over, many of them, they had no place to live. They had no job. And so now many of them are looking for a fresh start. And so they stay in the Army, but are sent out to West Texas in order to man forts and help oppose Indian attacks and try to stop Indians from attacking settlements in West Texas. So, because of their combat skill, many of these African American soldiers, they earned respect from the Native Americans, and they were given a name. This name was Buffalo Soldiers. Now, some people say that this was a sign of the Native Americans' respect for their fighting ability. There are also other historical views where they said to the Native Americans, the hair of the African American soldiers reminded them of the buffalo. And so those are two common views throughout history whenever you read books and do some research in that area. But the Buffalo Soldiers oftentimes were not treated fairly since they were serving in a former slave state. Imagine being a Buffalo Soldier, having your freedom, fighting and winning in the Civil War, now having to move to a southern state and try to gain respect from the Americans that believed in slavery. It's not a very fun or desired position to be in. And so many of these soldiers were looking to carve out a new life for themselves in the Army, but also be able to have good pay, shelter, and clothing. Now, the Buffalo Soldiers were given one specific order in West Texas, and that was to capture the infamous Apache leader, Victorio. Victorio had escaped the Army's clutches. The Army had been consistently looking for him, but to no avail, were never able to catch him. And so the Buffalo Soldiers were given this specific mission. You need to capture Victorio. And so they found him in a band of Apaches near the Guadalupe Mountains. This is the location of Guadalupe Peak, the highest mountain in Texas, located in the Mountains and Basins region in the west. And so after a 3-hour battle, the Indians were able to escape. They retreated and they fled across the Rio Grande, the southern border of the United States, into Mexico. Now, thankfully, the Mexican government and the United States government were able to work hand in hand. Mexican soldiers were able to capture Victorio, and he was later killed in battle. And that brings us to outlaws along the Rio Grande. This area of Texas, especially during this time period in the late 1800s, this was not a very populated region. And because it was not a populated region, there was not a whole lot of law enforcement. And so many outlaws or renegades or people who were running from the law, they lived in the Rio Grande region. So it's not an area that you would just want to travel through on your own or not being armed. And so Civil War deserters sometimes roamed the areas, carried out robberies, and the Texas Rangers were sent in to make an example of these men. Now, we talked about the Texas Rangers and how they were formed to oppose Indian attacks, but now they became an extra hand of the law. Law enforcement sent in to try to bring order to areas that were in chaos and where a lot of crime was taking place. Now, Texas Rangers, while they were a hand of the law, they also had a reputation of being wild and unruly, and oftentimes violent to an extreme. But they were successful at what they did. And so the Rangers, in order to make an example out of these outlaws, they killed 12 of them. In the specific incident that I mentioned in your notes, they were cattle rustlers. Cattle rustlers are those who would steal cattle from ranchers. And so the Rangers caught these 12 cattle rustlers, killed them, and dumped their bodies in the middle of the town square. Now, this is what we call preventative measures or deterrence. Imagine walking into a town where there's a town square, just an open area in the middle of the town, and you see 12 bodies, 12 dead bodies just laying in the middle of the road. To us nowadays, we'd be like, oh my goodness, that's sick, that's disgusting, that's awful. What's going on? Why have they not yet been buried? That's degrading to their bodies. Well, to the Rangers, they said, if anyone sees this in the middle of the town, then they'll know that we mean business and we're not afraid to enforce the law, even if it means killing those who are breaking it. And so the Texas Rangers, we'll see later on, they end up being shut down for a while in Texas history until they are later brought back. But the Texas Rangers were used to enforce law in the Rio Grande region specifically. So that's it for this chapter. I do want to make a couple of announcements. So this lecture should be watched on Thursday, March 19th. I'm still getting a lot of questions, which is perfectly fine. Please do not hesitate to ask me any questions about when classwork is due, where you can find video lectures or assignments. And so if you can look at the screen here, and it's important to pay attention to this. If you look at the screen here, this is the classwork tab. So if you go to the classwork tab, there is a list of all of the assignments and material that I've given you. Now, notice that this video lecture says that it's due on March 17th. Just because it's an assignment, the video lectures, they are not graded. I know that it asks you to submit those in and turn those in, but that's just to let me know that you've seen it. If you can't do it, or if there's no way to submit it, that is perfectly fine. I just want you to be able to watch the lecture, so it is not a graded assignment. Then you had the reading assessment, okay, which is due on the 18th. And so you can find the reading assessment by clicking on this and then clicking on the reading assessment, the Google form there, so that you can so that you can fill that form out. And again, with reading assessments, you can use your book. It is no problem at all if you use your book. It's like an open book quiz. For this first reading assignment, I'm taking it as a completion grade. And then you can also see the video lecture 2. And I gave the pages that it's covering and also the date on which it needs to be watched. So video lecture 2 needs to be watched on March 18th. That's Wednesday. Okay, and again, it's not a graded assignment. It's just to get you the video lecture so that you can see the PowerPoint and hear my lesson. And then on Thursday, I'm getting it confused with 8th grade. On Thursday, you will have your Chapter 18 quiz that covers lectures 1 through 2. And notice that I've put the date here, March 19th, 2020. And so this is when this quiz is going to be available. I put it up here not so that you could take it early, but just to let you know that on March 19th, you will be taking this quiz. And you have until 11:59, 1 minute before midnight, to take that quiz and turn it in on Thursday, March the 19th. And I apologize for any confusion about when this quiz was due, but I think we've settled it. The quiz will be on March 19th, 2020. That's a Thursday. So this is where you can find all of your assignments. Okay, it's under the classwork tab here. And then, of course, under stream, You'll see the upcoming assignments and when they're due. You'll also see important announcements that I make. So please always just check the stream to see if there are any more important announcements that you need to catch up on or anything that I've made. Also, if you're going to ask questions, you can either email me or you can ask me, which some of you have already, on the stream page. You can comment below my announcements. Now, what I do ask, so that we can keep things organized, because I'm dealing with texts, emails, and also on Google Classroom here. If you're going to ask me a question on Google Classroom, please make sure that you ask a question underneath the announcement or assignment that your question's about, if that makes sense. So if your question is about this announcement, please ask it and type it underneath the announcement. If it's about the lecture, then you can type it underneath this lecture, or as always, you can email me as well. All right, I hope y'all have a great rest of the day. Stay healthy and safe, and I will see y'all on Friday.